Evil is very real, and it has this way of seeping so slowly into our lives that we have no idea what's going on. We have no idea that it is slowly taking over until it fully unveils itself. And unfortunately, in so many stories, we see that the damage is done by the time that we recognize something is unfolding. But here's the hope. The hope is that it is never too late to turn things around. Today on the Playing with Fire podcast, we're going to be exploring Brian Cole's harrowing journey. Now, Brian lived a life of crime. He was one of the most devout Satanists behind bars. But today, he's a changed man. He is a pastor who is spreading the gospel and warning others about the dangers of evil. On the Playing with Fire podcast, he will describe how he came to worship the devil, his escape from the occult, and why his story is a cautionary tale to so many others. I asked Brian what led him into Satanism, and this is his story.
Well, the entryway was, I didn't understand who I was in Christ. I was 10 years old, and I had an abusive father in the house. I was bullied at school. And my mom forced us to go to church, a very strict Lutheran church. And even while I was in confirmation there, I was kind of emotionally abused there too. You know, same thing as my dad telling me what a loser I was, a nobody, a nothing. I never amount to anything. And with the church, I also got, and you're going to hell at the end of that. So I was 10 years old, bullied, didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. Didn't want to be home, didn't want to be at school, didn't want to be at church. And we know that when we look for our purpose and fulfillment in life outside of what Christ has for us, the enemy's always going to make a way. And he made that way through some older students in the school next door to our elementary school. There was a tree line between our schools, and that's where the high school kids would come out and smoke their cigarettes. And one day I was out on the schoolyard, and whenever I was out on the schoolyard, I'd walk the perimeter, hoping no one had noticed me that day and beat me down and rip out my football cards or whatever. And some students called me over, say, "Hey, kid, come here." And I went over there and they handed me a cigarette. I was 10. I knew about cigarettes. My dad smoked. I didn't, but I smoked it. They were talking to me. They were paying attention to me. They weren't calling me names, beat me down. And it happened frequently after that. Kids stuck up for me when they saw kids messing with me. Eventually, I really looked up to these kids. You know, I idolized them and hero worshiped them and wanted to be a part of everything they were part of. You know, obviously that cigarette went to a joint and eventually to some porn. And during the summer, after school was out, I tried to hang out with them as much as I could. I lived out in the country, so it was hard to get into town. But that's when I found out that they were involved in something called Satanism. Now, they were just dabblers. I didn't know about dabbling, and I really didn't even know what I was getting involved in. Yeah, all I knew is I wanted to do whatever these kids were doing. I wanted to be part of their clique.
Despite wanting to fit in, Brian wasn't willing to engage in one thing: animal sacrifice. Now, that led him to engage in something else, self-mutilization, as he explains it. And at first, all of it was really self-focused. All of this sort of engagement in Satanism was part of his quest to be feared by others and to be rebellious. But eventually, that situation, that feeling of wanting that fear in others of him manifests itself in something much darker.
One of the rituals, the first rituals I was in, they were going to sacrifice a squirrel, and I told them I would not do that because animals are the only thing I've loved all my life. In my past hated life, I didn't like people, but I loved animals. And they said, "Well, he demands blood, so you're going to have to cut yourself." So I did, and that ended up becoming an addiction for 33 years, cutting and self-mutilation. So on and off throughout the next few years, next couple of years with these guys, just did some dabbling in it and little rituals here and there. And they had me going into Catholic churches and stealing the Eucharist and defiling the rituals. But it was very infrequent. We did this and didn't know much about it. But all I knew is, especially after a couple of years of doing this, is it was rebellious. It was against the norms of society. It made people fearful of me. And I wanted that notoriety because I had enough of being on the other end of things. So that was really the entryway into that, was just getting involved with older kids, trying to find somebody to notice me and love me. Didn't think about it theologically. Just like I said, it was more of a mindset of I wanted to do what they wanted to do. And boy, was this had to be really rebellious against the church I was going to. So I didn't really believe in God at that time and all that kind of stuff. I just went there because I was forced to go there, and I didn't really, I guess, believe in either end of the things. So theologically, I had no idea what I was doing other than being rebellious.
Soon, though, the initial thirst for power metastasized itself into an obsession with Satan and with Satanism.
What changed really was I was kind of the dabbling guy from 10 until I was 18 years old. And I really, during that time, I wasn't involved in any like major rituals or, doing the books of shadows and having all the ritualistic tools and all that kind of stuff. I would go out and I would trash symbolism in the graveyards. Any kind of Christianity imagery, I would bust it up. In the wintertime, at Christmas time, I'd go into yards and bust up nativity scenes and break into churches and defile the altars and stuff like that. That's all I did for all those years until I was 18 years old. When I was 18 years old, and from 14 to 18, I was locked up in juvenile detention facilities, everything from group homes, foster homes, shelter homes, and Lincoln Hills Boys School, and aged out of that. I went and tried the military and got kicked out of there 2 weeks before basic. And my hatred for authority really grew at that time. I hated people. I hated authority. And I just wanted to be the man. Between selling drugs and being the go-to guy to get people taken care of and all that was what I was about. But because I, got into that at an early age and was, even though unbeknownst to me, I was involved with that, I believe I was being influenced by demonic forces, by the spirit forces. And when I turned 18, I got arrested my first time as an adult. I got hooked up in a federal sting operation. I got a 10-year sentence. And when I went into prison, that's when it went from dabbling to all in. I had nothing but 23 hours a day, 7 days a week in my cell. And that's when I really connected. And I don't know what brought that on other than what was probably inhabiting me. But at that time in the 80s, they didn't really have a limit on the amount of books you could have and all this kind of stuff. So I started ordering, all kinds of books on Satanism and ceremonial magic and all this kind of stuff. And 23 hours a day, that's all I would do, is I would start reading this stuff and memorizing this stuff. And at one point I sold my soul to Beelzebub and made a pact. And I got a tattoo of a cross tattooed on the bottom of my left foot so I could stomp on God whenever I walked and all this kind of stuff. So that's when it went to all in. And it was during that time, within the first year of being incarcerated in all in, when I saw in the chapel that all kinds of religions were allowed to worship in there. The Christians and the Catholics and the Buddhists and the Muslims and all these other people, Jehovah's Witnesses, but they have nothing for pagans and Wiccans and Satanists. So I started a battle with the Department of Corrections in Wisconsin that lasted 6 years, which I won. In 1990, the first Wiccan pagan religious group started in Fox Lake Correctional Institution and Oshkosh Correctional Institution. And so eventually, within the next couple of years, it was incorporated into their 903 rules. So up to this day, even every prison system in the state of Wisconsin has a Wiccan pagan religious group, which I started.
Despite diving all in, Brian soon became uncomfortable with the power that he felt he had handed over to the devil. While he tried to flee into other forms of the occult, the evil he had engaged in never left him.
Well, it changed me in a few ways. I burned and got rid of and burned most of my stuff after I got saved and got out of prison. I used to keep journals, books of shadows, for all those years. I had tons of them. And I have one. I kept one that was between 1990 and 1992. And reading through, because I don't remember a whole lot from back then, but reading through it, and it's one of the things I know I dealt with, but reading through my journals, I had different personalities. And there was still a young Brian, my original name is Brian Connect, there was still an original Brian Connect that was trapped in there that didn't want what was going on. And he would come out every now and then and write in there. And then I had my Beelzebub personality, the one I had when I first came to Satan. And then 1987, some things happened. I kind of transformed out of the Satanism stuff because I believed that he had too much control over me, and it went from promising me things that I'll do for you if you serve me to now you're mine, and I didn't care for that. I didn't want that. I had to be in charge, and I started getting involved with Crowleyism, Crowleyism, the OTO and Thelema and all that, because then another lie and deception of the enemy, right? I'll just walk the middle path, or even the white path, but I'll walk the middle path, and they won't have control over me anymore. I will control them, and I will have authority over them. What a lie that is, but I believed in that lie. And from 1987 on, I was mostly focused on the gray area, the middle ground, Crowleyism and ceremonial magic, where you would conjure up spirits and have them do your bidding and all that, rather than actually serving the devil himself and the demonic forces. Beelzebub was the one that I served, but yet I never fully let control go of that, or they didn't let go of me completely, because every time someone ticked me off in life or did something against me in life, I would go right back to that and do destruction rituals against these individuals. And so it messed with me in that I had multiple personalities, and I don't know if it was multiple personalities or those were the demonic forces that had control over my body at certain times. There definitely was that. So it messed with me mentally and emotionally like that. I had, Romans 1 talks about how we trade the truth for a lie. We're foolish when we do that. We trade worshiping the Creator, and instead we worship His creation, and eventually we start worshiping idols of man, birds, four-footed animals. Pretty soon we're crawling on bellies like serpents, and when that happens, God turns us over to ourselves, where there is no morality anymore, and there was no morality left in me. But again, there was times, like I saw in my journal, where that part would come out and I'd be crying out. I was involved with, Wicca and Asatru and astrology and Buddhism and all these other aspects of the occult, because I had to know about it. So he had that much control over me, where he was just saturating me with all these lies.
Brian also explained the many powers and abilities he believes that he was able to experience as a result of his going all in on the occult.
That's another one of the big deceptions of the enemy. I don't care what you can call it, Satanism, you can call it white Wicca, white magic, Buddhism, whatever you want is still satanic. It's still the forces of evil. Anything outside of Jesus Christ is demonic, period. And we like to put nice little labels on it, like I did. Well, I'm going to stop worshiping the evil one here himself and being his little minion to being able to control and walk the gray path or the white path. There's no path outside of Jesus Christ other than the path of evil, and the king of the air runs all that. But yes, I still continue to carry that over. So we know that the Lord inherently gives us certain gifts and stuff that we use to edify the body of Christ. And I still have this gift, although a lot less pronounced than it was when I was in the occult. And that was just the ability to read people. I was always really good. I did tarot cards and stuff like that all the time, and I didn't even need them, but I could read people and I could tell them, what was going to happen to them and what their life was like and all that, just by talking with them for a minute. And I still have that ability to be able to read people, but it's a good thing now, and I use it to edify the body of Christ, whether it's a word of encouragement or a word of, hey, just beware of what you're doing here because it can lead you to trouble.
In our discussions, Brian also recounted 2 specific times over the years when he experienced something physically manifest itself during his time in the occult.
There was only 2 times that I distinctly remember actually seeing something physically, in a physical way. Otherwise, no. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many different forms of ceremonial magic and stuff will saturate the room with incense to the point where you can hardly see. I mean, it's all over. And part of the reason of that is because, just like with God is spirit. Well, so are the demonic forces. They're not actual entities that you walk around. I mean, it could be, right? But most of the time they're entities. So when you saturate the room with incense and stuff, you can see when stuff starts moving around in there. So one time, I mean, there was no doubt that something like that happened, because there was a great swirling around of stuff. Like there was actually something in the room that was moving around, and it went beyond. This was when I was into ceremonial magic or thelema and conjuring up spirits on the circle of protection. Well, it went outside the circle of protection, So, and the other time there was actually, we were in a room, and it was at the place I lived in when I was released from prison in 2006. And, I was on methamphetamine and stuff. I've always been on drugs. But when you stay awake for so many hours, even without using any drugs, if you're awake for 72 hours, every sensory unit in you starts hallucinating. So I'm not saying that it could have been something or it could have been hallucination, but there was more than me in there, and we all saw it. But we were doing a ritual in 2006 when I got out of prison, the 13th time maybe, and we were doing a ritual, and it was a closed room. I had no animals in the house, and all of a sudden there was a cat, and I don't know what color it was because we just had candles going and it was filled with incense, but there was a cat that just showed up and started running around the room, and then it disappeared. And I believe that was an entity that we were trying to conjure up that maybe showed itself in its familiar, right, form. But those were the only 2 times in the 33 years I practiced the occult that I actually saw something.
Now, here's an interesting thing. You might be wondering how Brian felt that he was able to communicate with Satan and with evil. And as he explained this, it was captivating and fascinating because he noted that he would actually allow himself to become possessed.
In my opinion, that's one of the hardest parts of Christianity, is discerning God's will to your own will. But in the occult, there's the automatic writing was one. I just sit down and allow myself to become possessed or whatever and start writing stuff. Dreams. I don't remember hardly any dreams anymore, but I had a journal and a dream journal because I remembered my dreams. I'd write them down, and I think they prophesied to my life, things that I was going to do and should do and all that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of it done that way. I believe that the enemy also, just like the Lord, will send people into your life to give you a word somehow. And same there, I'd have people from other aspects of the occult coming to me and telling me, hey, blah, blah told me to tell you this, or you're supposed to do that. And I would listen. I wouldn't even question it because I knew these people, or I knew what camp they came from. So that's how it was kind of done there. Astrology, tarot readings for myself, whatever it might be.
Brian was undoubtedly one of the most devout Satanists behind bars, but eventually something profound happened. He came to the end of himself. He was looking for a way off drugs and to recovery, and his journey led him to some of the most unlikely of places.
I didn't believe in God. And this is funny. I don't know how many occultists you've talked to, but you might see a pattern in this. I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe Jesus. I didn't believe Jesus existed. I thought this Bible was another mythology book like all the other ones I studied. So I didn't believe in none of that. And it's funny because a lot of, when you're involved with ceremonial magic and thelema and all that, you actually use the names of God in the circle to protect you, and you call upon the angels and archangels for protection, but yet you don't believe in them. So no, I wasn't seeking a way out. I wasn't trying to find Jesus and all that. One of my biggest religions was hating Christians. I hated Christians more than anything in life, especially after doing 27 years in prison and jail and seeing all these wannabes and stuff. I hated them. But anyway, I was in a county jail. It was 2009. I just got arrested. I was probably going up for a long time, and I was 44 years old. And I think this was a moment, like in scriptures, where the prodigal son went out, messed up, and pretty soon he's slopping with the pigs, and he had a moment where he came to himself. I think that was a point where I came to myself, and I realized that, man, this ain't working. Life stinks. Up to that point, for a year, I had tried to commit suicide by overdosing. I just didn't want to live anymore. And I just had gotten married 6 months before I was arrested here. There was a 6-year-old autistic boy in the marriage, and I didn't even realize it because that ain't what I was in it for. I was in it for the young girl, 20 years younger than me. By the way, we're still married. We celebrated 13 years, have 2 new children. Thank you, Jesus. So I had come to myself enough to realize I had a problem, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to self-help myself off drugs. That was probably my biggest problem. And lo and behold, there's this faith-based drug and alcohol program called the Almond Tree in the jail. And at first I'm like, no way I'm going into that and have to sit around with these Bible thumpers. And then I found out you had to have a Bible to do homework. And I'm like, I definitely ain't doing that. But I think, like I said, with Romans 1, God has to let his hands off you and turns you over to yourself. But when you come back to yourself, he never walked away. Jesus never walks away. He pursues you to the end of the earth. You're the one that turned your back on him. But I think it was time enough for put his hands back down on me. And I know he did because he pushed me around once in a while. One of those was pushing me into the class because that's something I would have never done in the past. So I had to have a Bible to do the homework. It was an hour class, and then you had to go back and do this homework. It was all fill in the blanks with scripture about addictions and stuff. So I went to the library by myself one day, got one of those little pocket Gideon Bibles. I didn't want anybody to see me with one, and put it down my pants, went back to my room, put it under my pillow. And after they locked down at night, because even in the jail, they let me out of my room, my cell unit for an hour every day to practice my rituals in a solitary room. So I pulled that out and I started doing the homework. And one day I came across this verse in Psalm 51:7. It says, "Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow." And anybody who practices ceremonial magic and is involved with the Lima and the Gnosticism knows that is part of the cleansing rituals you say every day. And I didn't understand why that was in here. And I'm like, what is that doing in here? And pretty soon I'm starting to read now instead of just opening it up and filling the blanks. And I come across some more stuff that's in Aleister Crowley's books and in our rituals. And I'm like, what is all this doing here? And then I start thinking, well, paganism was around long before Christianity. They took this stuff from us and blah, blah, blah. Fast forward a couple days after that thought, came back to my room from rec, book laying on my floor called The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, picked it up, read it. And by the time I got done with that book, even though I was messed up on drugs and it did all this stuff for years, I wasn't stupid. And when I got done with that book, I could no longer deny the fact that Jesus existed on this earth, whether he was God or a prophet or just some good guy or whatever, didn't matter. He existed, and there's proof of it. And this book was validated that this is the same thing that we have today that they wrote back then. And I had to do something with that. And by the time that was all in my head, which is why I love apologetics, because I didn't believe in none of this. I was reading the truth. All my life, I had sought truth, whether it was the knowledge and conversation with Holy Guardian Angel, Nirvana, the oneness with the Great All, whatever it was, all the while kicking to the curb the sovereign truth of Jesus Christ. And he says that you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And who is the truth? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and life. Not one of many ways, not a better way, the way. And it went from me filling in the blanks to this Bible filling in my blanks, and I had a whole lot of blanks. And I got saved on January 22nd, 2009. He took me out of that. Erased most of it from my memory. I can't even remember half the rituals and stuff I used to do every single day, and I'm so thankful for that. And he took that from me. I hear so many people brought out of that are still attacked so many times, and I've never been attacked. One time I came up to against someone who had demonic possession that a friend of mine I was living with called me up and said, hey, we need you here. And the devil or the demon that was inhabiting her called me out. He knew me right then and there. I know you, Ozzy. This woman didn't know me from Fred. It was the first and only time I've ever come up against the demonic forces that knew me. And it didn't even terrify me, because the first thing out of my mouth was, yeah, used to being the key word. You know who I serve now, and you got no authority here. That's it. So this has set me free in so many ways, I can't even begin to explain it.
Today, Brian is out of prison. He has a family, and he is working as a pastor. He has had an incredible transformation story. And as he shares that story, he has some powerful messages for us and also some warnings. We're living today in an era in which people are denying God and faith at an exponential rate. And yet, while that is happening, there's an increased interest in occult practices and also in spiritual things. Now, Brian noted that things like the tarot cards, Ouija boards, astrology, and other things like that, these elements are not only hated by God, but they're also spiritually dangerous.
One of the things and this was a few years ago, I think it was 2014, when the Ouija movie came out. Now, so many people minimize Ouija boards and say, oh, it's just a game and you're making too much of it and all that. And, the Lord makes it very clear. I mean, if you just Google, look up sorcery, fortune telling, astrology, even all that stuff, Google it. To what the scriptures say about, it's going to give you all kinds of scriptures. The Lord said he detests those kinds of things. So even getting into astrology and, I'm a Libra and this, that, he doesn't want that, man. That's evil. That is evil and will lead to things and will open you up to things coming in that you don't want to come in. And now the Ouija board is a great example of a simple tool that the enemy uses to make people think, well, there's nothing to this. It's just a game. Let's have fun with it. And then, if you go on the Amazon and you look up Ouija board and you go onto there and you look at the people's feedback on this, you'll see that, yeah, some are like, oh, everybody's making a big deal. It's just a game. But then you see all hundreds of people talking about experiences that they've had with it. So Hasbro helped fund this movie, Ouija, not a lot, but they helped fund it because they were hoping that it would, increase their sales a little bit. That movie came out, ironically, the week of Halloween in 2014. And in 1 month, it grossed, like $10 million or something. But in 1 month, by the end of November, if you look it up on Google, by the end of November, in 1 month, the sales for the Ouija board rose 300%. That is the kind of influence and impact our social media and TV and all that. The enemy, what's the enemy called? The power of the air. He is the king of the powers of the air. And how do we do TV and stuff like that? That's all airwaves, man. He controls all that. It can be used for good, yes, but the enemy has thousands of years of experience. He knows how to use these things to influence our kids. And he takes the littlest things like a Ouija board or tarot cards or tea leaf reading or going to a psychic or, it's just a horror movie, Ouija, whatever. And let's even minimize that even more. There's even cartoons and making it seem all innocent and stuff. And this stuff is impacting our children, who there's probably tons of them like me who don't really have any kind of purpose in life and no meaning in life. And everybody tells me I'm ugly and all this and that. But man, these people, they adore me and they're telling me I'm something and I want to latch onto that. I want more of that. And you can go online and find plenty of stories, and you might have done some yourself, of people who have come into Wicca and witchcraft and the occult through shows and stuff like this. So he uses all kinds of innocent seeming things to bring you in to his bidding.
In the end, Brian said his own personal journey was plagued by that quest that we discussed earlier, the quest to find love and acceptance. And he offered some important words to parents today, important reminders about why we need to be encouraging our children in the right direction.
I speak at a lot of schools and stuff, and usually the kids or a teacher will say, after I get done telling my story, what could have somebody said or done to you to help you not go into what you got into? And I keep saying the same thing, nothing. Because I was so rebellious by that time. I was so open to just wanting attention and wanting somebody to love me. I would have dove into anything. All I do know is that I can't blame my father. I can't blame the school teachers. I can't blame the church. I can't blame anybody but myself, because regardless of how young or old you are still the one that makes the final choices as to how you're going to deal with situations. And I could have dealt with that in a whole different way. And I say people didn't love me and everybody's, called me this and I was bullied by everybody. Well, my mom loved me and I'm sure there was other people that loved me, but I was so far gone out of that scope of accepting that love because of all the hate. And I was shown that everybody, you're a loser, a nobody, a nothing, and you're never going to amount to anything. And I just heard that over and over so much that I allowed that to define the next 33 years of our life. But this is why it's so important for our parents or a parent if they're divorced, and how much even more so when you're divorced, that our children need to hear this from their parents, that you are loved, you are a masterpiece, you are more loved and highly valued than you will ever know. You are fearfully and wonderfully made, because you are getting hit from the enemy so much more time out of each day than you are by your parents. That, you know, they only have a certain time with you, and so it's so important to instill those into our children. And if those were instilled in me, we know kids still walk away from the faith if they have good Christian parents. You know, we can't blame the parents, but man, it's just so important. If my parents would have paid attention to me and loved me, then, to answer your question, maybe things could have been different, but I chose to go a different way with that.
Brian's story is obviously unique when compared to some of the other stories we've heard on the Playing with Fire podcast. His direct worship of Satan and the subsequent fallout, and inevitably his amazing conversion, show us not only the dangers of the occult, but also the ability to change our hearts and our lives no matter how far we've fallen, no matter where we are. For more on evil and what the Bible says about healing, read the book Playing with Fire, a modern investigation into demons, exorcism, and ghosts. You can grab it on Amazon or wherever books are sold. And for more Christian podcasts, great shows, there are thousands of them, be sure to download the Edify app. It's EDIFI in the app stores. And be sure to also visit edify.app in your web browser for more.